welcome to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. I'm your host, Louis Padian. I hope that you're doing well and are enjoying the podcast and the topics we've covered so far. These podcasts are released every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, so be sure to subscribe wherever you are listening to be kept up to date. So today we'll be building on one of our previous episodes and looking at 4 more ways to lose weight with a desk job. So if you haven't already, episode 21 is where we did the initial 4, and there's lots of different things that we could implement around improving our health and managing our weight a bit better with a desk job. And I want the key message to be around this in particular topic, that I don't expect you to do all of these things all at once. In fact, if you can just take one of them and make a slight improvement, be consistent with it, it can have a huge impact on maintaining your weight or losing weight and getting to a healthier body weight. But also your health, your activity, your overall quality of life can massively improve, and reduction of sort of health-related illness long term as well. So if you haven't already, after this episode, I recommend going back to listen to episode 21. And these are more for inspiration. And when we did episode 21, we covered things like prepping your food, setting boundaries around food and what people discuss around you, which can be really healthy for you, trying to get regular walks in, and starting with an activity tracker or using an activity tracker or an activity diary. The reason why I think this is important is the vast majority of people are sort of a lot sedentary, quite sedentary these days. And I found it myself when I've had desk jobs in the past that it was quite easy to gain weight and more difficult to lose weight and get to a healthier weight. And when you're at a desk all day and you feel like you're tied to it, it can be really frustrating. Boredom can kick in, boredom eating, and can play on with things like physical discomfort as well, with especially me, my lower back and things like that, as well as just feeling a bit heavier and not quite yourself. So people who are actively wanting to lose weight, and it is often a hot topic around the office, people trying a new diet, getting a bit more active, lots of health initiatives, and it's great to see workplaces actually taking initiatives to their staff and trying to improve physical activity. But often these probably aren't as effective as we'd like them to be, and they probably are seen as being a bit more controlling, when actually it can be really good to be staff led. And that's something that we've tried within our office, is try to get more health initiatives. And like we said in the last episode, we covered about getting regular walks in. When we were in the office together, the care coordinator is a great team that I work with within our office. We're like, right, we're going to get a regular walk in, even if it's just up the road for 10 minutes and back, every Monday morning after our team meeting, to just get some fresh air, get some daylight, not chat about work, but get some activity in as well. And it just massively improves staff morale. But those consistent habits can really add up in the long term to helping people manage their weight as well. So the reason that it's really important is helpful in a lot of people want to achieve this, but also the long-term effects of improving health outcomes, health, happiness, quality of life, which really sit and really align with what I'm trying to do as a coach. So 4 more things that we can implement alongside the initial prepping food, setting boundaries, regular walks, and using an activity tracker. Number 1, and this was a new concept that I tried during lockdown actually, was try standing desk or walking meetings. And I personally tried a standing desk and I found it massively helped, and I continued to use that until we left and moved up and started traveling a little bit. And this is a higher up desk as well, and I think they're super beneficial just for sort of daily comfort in regards to my lower back, sitting down too much. But also what you tend to find is that when people are on their feet, they tend to be a bit more productive and get to the point a little bit more, and that's a benefit to those walking meetings as well. What we see is when people have a standing desk, they can actually burn a lot more calories throughout the day, because standing burns more calories than sitting. But as I've said, they potentially just get stuff done a little bit better, as when we sit down, we're a lot more relaxed. We can stay there for a long while and it's not really physically straining. When if you're on your feet, we sort of get to the point a little bit more so we can sit down in between. So it can be a really beneficial thing for productivity as well. With the walking meetings as well, it's adding on to the fact that we're getting more activity, getting more steps in, increasing off energy expenditure, which will help and align with weight loss long term, and just can get rid of those sort of dull meetings where you don't really follow the agenda. You end up sitting around talking for an hour and don't really get to the point. And actually, everyone standing on their feet, everyone going for a walk, can lift the mood a little bit, but also allow us to focus on getting to the point of what we want to achieve, and can be a really useful impact on helping people just getting the most out of their time at work. And got some research as always to support these findings, as I think it's really useful to not only see how I've observed it within the workplace and observed it with my clients, but also what the scientific literature says as well. So a 2009 study found that people who use standing desks for 6 hours per day lost more weight and had better blood sugar control and cholesterol levels than those who sat regularly at their desks. So that's where we see that correlation of standing for 6 hours or more during the day. Sounds like a lot, but with all these things and behavior change, it's not about jumping in at the deep end and going, right, we're going to go straight from seated to standing all day, but having periods of standing up throughout the day and building that up over time and getting to your comfort level as well, because some people might not get to that 6 hours, and that's completely fine. But using that as sort of a target to slowly progress as we go, and seeing what your sort of levels with you getting productivity, comfort, enjoyment, quality of life, and just enjoyment within your job as well. You don't want it to feel like we've taken all the seats away and you can't relax at points. It's definitely not what we're trying to do here. But when we're looking at trying to manage our weight a little bit better, it can be really useful in helping do that, as alongside managing our blood sugars levels a little bit better, improving cholesterol levels as well compared to people who just sit down regularly. Another study from 2016 found people who had walking meetings burn more calories to steps than those who were sitting, which makes sense. People who sit down for a meeting within half an hour, say you've got half-hour meeting slot, even if it's a slow, gentle walk, you could probably get 1,000, 2,000 steps in potentially. And that's just sort of strolling along, and that's the sort of pace that we want it. There's been some interesting observational data from people getting walking treadmills at home with a standing desk and having it set on a really low, almost like non-moving pace. And people tend to find that they actually find it a lot better than just standing still. So if your workplace is willing to help and support with that, then that could be another initiative as well. But overall, standing desks or walking meetings can be really easy things. And if they are within a company and you're able to speak to your manager, I'm sure they'll be keen to get on board, as there's lots of good things to potentially come from it in regards to work and productivity as well. So number 2 is manage your environment. And amongst a lot of the episodes, we'll probably touch on this topic quite a bit around controlling the controllables. And within the office environment, it's really easy for snacks to be easily or readily available on hand at arm's length, which just makes it more tempting. And we often feel that it's down to willpower, and willpower is a finite source. And if we don't even have to test it in the first place by just moving that object further away or out of sight, that can be sort of make that difficult decision of, I don't want those biscuits all day, and they're staring at you, you feel like they're talking to you throughout the day. Actually takes that conversation away, takes that question away of whether I'm going to eat the biscuits or not, because they probably don't even cross your mind. And one example is when I worked within a health company a couple of years ago, so this isn't a recent thing, and it was quite difficult because the manager of this health initiative, it was in the Yorkshire area in Leeds, and it was to do with the sort of the weight management programs, and the office itself potentially wasn't the most healthy environment in my perspective. A lot of the conversations around food, weight, body image, things like that weren't particularly positive. But the manager, who obviously struggling a lot with a lot of things at the time regarding her health, chronic pain issues. But one thing is that we always noticed that she would offer snacks and crisps and things like that and have them to hand on the desk, which she sort of saw as an act of kindness, but can be counterintuitive to people achieving their goals. And it's quite a natural thing to lean to food when we're feeling uncomfortable, when we're feeling pain, as to help manage our emotions a little bit better. But one of the things that she really struggled with was her weight, and potentially an easier thing that we could have suggested at the time, potentially I should have at the time, if we'd had that conversation, and it was right to do so, is discuss potentially improving her environment. And offices are really difficult to sort of, it can create quite a culture where it's offering food all around or having certain things. And one of the things that it really sort of didn't agree with, that they used to have a thing called Fat Fridays, which I didn't really enjoy, where they'd order in various takeaways, and I couldn't eat them because of my allergies at the time. But the language around it was really negative, not a positive environment to be in. However, it's quite a common thing within the office environment to sort of have those highly palatable, really tasty, low nutritious foods, which potentially can put us in out of our calorie deficit if we're looking to lose weight. So a simple thing could be having food in the kitchen in a separate room, creating that friction when we're looking at changing behavior, trying to stop ourselves doing unwanted behaviors. simple things trying to create friction there. Putting it in a different room just creates that extra barrier of going, well, instead of it being at arm's length, for me having those biscuits, chocolates, crisps, actually going, well, I've got to go to the kitchen and get them. Okay, well, it probably can't be bothered then, and that's okay. So creating those boundaries and controlling environment a bit better, and having potentially better snacks to hand. So if you are feeling snackish, then have some fruit there. Fruit first principle can be really useful around that, and creating a more positive environment where potentially we bring in different fruits throughout the week, or each week we bring in a different fruit to share amongst the team within the office to create that better environment of having more nutritious, better foods for our calorie control potentially, and slowly changing that environment step by step through that as well. It can be a really useful tactic, and like I said, with a lot of these things, behavior change is really hard. It takes time, so actually taking a slower and more steady approach to it can be hugely beneficial in getting lasting changes and meaningful changes, rather than what we tend to see is that it comes from the top down. It's not even a discussion within the office. Make drastic changes which don't tend to stick, and people almost resent and push against them. When actually, if it's staff led and comes within, and we sort of can all get agreement on this is a positive thing, then you get greater buy-in as well. So potentially, if you're within an office where you want to improve the healthy habits and healthy behaviours, then it might be worth having that discussion with teammates who potentially have similar goals to you, similar values, and starting from inside out rather than it coming from the top down. So that's another thing to consider as well. So with that, another thing when we're having a look at this is around the research. So a 2000 study found that people who had decluttered workspaces were more likely to eat more nutritious snacks and drinks than those who had cluttered workspaces. So this is something we haven't really touched on, but it's around having a clear desk is a clear mind, sort of thing you might see, and just allowing you to work a bit better within that, and not having all that temptation, all those things that can slip into your thought process just by you catching eyes with it. Then just removing that, having a clear space allows you to focus on what you want to do. And this isn't me going productivity is the most important thing. This actually links into people not taking the time for their food as well. So if we're not having separate sort of a succinct or a particular meal time where we're focused on our food, and that's what we'd call having a more mindful meal, actually it can drift between grazing all day and not really being as productive as we want with work. And if we have set blocks for work, and then also have time away from our computer and focused away where we're going to enjoy and have a really mindful meal, that can be a lot better for health outcomes and managing our weight as well. So again, another initiative there around decluttering the space, but also separating what you're doing at the time, not multitasking, as we know multitasking really isn't a thing. So that could be useful as well, decluttering the desk. A 2013 study found that people who are exposed to less nutritious food cues, such as pictures or sugary drinks, smell of cookies, etc., were more likely to eat less nutritious foods. So this is something that we touched on one of the previous episodes. I can't remember which one, but it was discussing around why they might have bakeries within sort of local supermarkets or corner shops these days, because that scent is really appealing and probably drives us to buy more food. So having been exposed to these cues throughout the day of just having a chocolate bar on your desk looking at your day probably means you're more likely to eat it rather than being in a desk drawer tucked away. You've still got the access to it, but it not giving you that cue can be really beneficial for the healthy behaviors that we want to encourage. And again, I'm not saying that you can't have these foods, but these highly calorific foods tend not to fit well by eating too often, with when we're trying to manage our weight by trying to be in a calorie deficit, as they can be quite calorie dense, low in fiber, low in nutrition, not be as filling, easy to overeat on compared to when we're looking at fruits, vegetables, whole foods. So moderating the amount of exposure you get to those foods can be really useful in managing your eating habits, but also with that managing your weight a bit better as well. So number 3, we're looking at time outside of work, and it's a huge opportunity to increase your activity. And this is something that people often overlook or feel needs to be an all or nothing approach, and often it doesn't have to be that way. So what we're trying to do is trying to get 30 minutes of activity. That's not 30 minutes of exercise, just of general physical activity. That could be walking, could be cycling, it could be something that's quite low intensity, doing activities or chores at home. So it doesn't have to be going for a run, it doesn't have to be going to the gym. If you want to do those things, fantastic. And there's benefits to those things as well. However, when we're looking at your physical activity throughout the week, it's a lot more lower intensity than higher intensity stuff that we can do for an hour or two without feeling too fatigued. And that's the sort of thing that we want to try to increase outside of our work hours as well. So if we're breaking down throughout the day, and this isn't me going, everyone's got the same 24 hours a day. I know that people have got different commitments and different things that take up their time and attention and their priorities as well. And I don't want to seem like I'm a personal trainer and nutritionist who doesn't have children, who has a fairly flexible job, who enjoys physical activity. I don't want to come down as condescending, well, why doesn't everyone do what I do? Because I understand everyone's circumstances are very individual and very different, and that's why we need to work on a way for it to work for you rather than against you. So if we take the sleep window, for example, that's 8 hours. If we're taking work, it could be 8 to 10 hours. Then we've got 6 to 8 hours per day that you've got to play with, where we're trying to get those 30 minutes of physical activity in per day. That's realistic for a lot of people, and it could just be taking yourself out for a 10-minute walk most days to start with and building up from there. Like I said, don't go from 0 to 60, because that's probably not going to be very comfortable, very easy, and very likely to stick long term. Actually starting gently, like I said, with some people that I've worked with in the past, if they really struggle with their physical activity and they want to get walking, then we say, right, we're going to go for 2 minutes maximum. That's what we're doing today. And almost get to a point where I want to do more, I want to do more. And that's what we're trying to achieve. But starting gently and knowing where you're at, and this is where we have to, I've mentioned it quite a few times, I think, in the past, is meeting yourself where you're at, being quite honest with that, not being judgmental, not beating yourself up, not comparing yourself who you used to be or what other people are. Meeting yourself where you are currently is really important, that, because meeting yourself there with a really big emphasis on compassion, kindness, what would future me thank me for, probably prioritizing health, well-being, overall quality of life. Physical activity probably plays a part in that for the vast majority of people. I would like to think it does. And you starting gently and going, well, I can't reach that 30 minutes per day every day or 5 times a week at the moment, but what can I manage? And sitting down and going, well, can I manage 2 minutes a day or 2 minutes at 3 days a week? Brilliant. Fantastic. Right, that sounds like a really good place to start. And then once we get in the habit of doing that, then we can look to increase it to 3 minutes, 5 minutes potentially, or increase the frequency of it and go, right, 3 days a week, I'm managing 2 minutes, walk up the road and back. It's getting a bit easier. Fantastic. Right, let's see if we can do it 4 days, 5 days a week, try and get that frequency up. And the end goal would be to try and get to that 30 minutes 5 times a week, if not every day. That would be really good. But meet yourself where you're at currently, not comparing yourself where you should be or what you used to be able to do, and working with your current situation rather than against it allows us to make those progressive steps forward. You don't run a marathon all in one go, you run it one step at a time. So see this as your marathon, and if you're not currently where you want to be, fantastic. Just meet yourself where you're at, being compassionate, going, you know what, I am where I am, and I'm doing the best that I can in the situation that I'm in with the tools that I have available. Right, maybe have a sit down, commit to a structured plan where I can manage to get those in, sit down, look at my diary, go where there are opportunities to increase my physical activity. What sort of physical activities do I enjoy, or potentially I able to include as part of my day to day? So it's not, instead of getting the food shop ordered in, actually going, well, maybe I'll go and do the food shop myself. So I might get the bus or drive there, might even walk there if I can. If I haven't got too much to get in, I can carry it back and actually walk around the supermarket, because that can contribute a couple of times a week for a lot of people to a significant amount of physical activity across a couple of weeks, a couple of months, a couple of years. It really adds up, and that's what the mentality we need to try and build in here. So now stop ranting and raving about that. The World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, which is sort of the American sort of government health advisors, published research in 2020 and 2023 and found people who exercise for more than 30 minutes, or should have been, what I should say, were physically active for 30 minutes most days of the week, lost more weight, had lower levels of body fat, had a lower risk of developing chronic diseases such as heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes. Those are all things that we want to achieve long term. And that was compared to people who didn't meet the 30 minutes most days of the week. So one of the things that I always used to do when I ran the weight management programs up in Leeds was sit down with people, and part of the program we had to discuss sort of risk factors with managing our weight or being overweight or being obese. And we'd discuss them and we'd go through them, and I said, this isn't there to scare you. And this isn't me saying that if we make positive changes, things like stroke, heart disease won't happen to you. But if you looked back and you had the opportunity to change and make health improvements, and these things happened, then you're probably kicking yourself a little bit. But I'd also like to think that if I was as healthy as I could be, managed to balance my life, I wasn't the most active person, I wasn't eating a super nutritious diet, but I felt like it was a fairly balanced and healthy diet long term, and these things happened, then I'd like to be looking back on what I've done and go, you know what, at least I tried. At least I tried to make a change towards these things and prevent them as best as I can. So it's not saying that we will definitely won't get these things, because there's a lot of other things that happen and can be at play here. But knowing that you have some influence on it is quite powerful and can be really empowering for people. So taking that in there, not to scare you, but going, well, this is me having some element of control. I'm not in complete control, but I have an element of influence there around my habits and behaviors and these health outcomes. Managing my weight, levels of body fat, which we know associated with better health outcomes long term, and risk of developing chronic disease or lifestyle disease long term, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and strokes and things. So just a little message there around trying to get those bits of physical activity in when you can. It doesn't have to be perfect, and that's one of the things that a lot of social media will tell you to do, that you need to do an X, Y, Z. No, just aim to be a little bit better, and then get comfortable with that, and then try to get a bit better again, because that's all we can do. It's all about that improvement and being a little bit better than rather than trying to be perfect. So hopefully the third one around time outside of work, trying to make most of that time by getting little bits of physical activity in there, can be really useful as well. Right, on to the last one. This one links closely with the last one on tip number 3, but it's tip number 4, which is active travel to work. And this might not be feasible for everyone, but if you can, there is a great opportunity for people to get more physically active on their commute to work. Often, a lot of us will sit down in the car, drive from A to B, and there'll be very little physical activity involved. And I think there's some great initiatives around sort of park and rides or public transport, which can be hugely beneficial to people's health, and we see the health outcomes with that being a lot more beneficial, and also can be reduce the amount of stress traveling to work, potentially improve the sort of level of quality of life traveling to work rather than sat in a car in traffic all day. So there's potential benefits around getting fresh air, daylight, conversations with other people, some movement in there. Time just outside in general is not quite nice rather than being locked up in your car. So there's opportunities there to improve your day to day, not just the health outcomes of managing your weight, which is the main sort of goals from this podcast at least, but just your quality of life and overall happiness long term. So people could bike to work if that's possible. People get public transport if that's possible. And this isn't me saying, well, we should all be doing this, because that's not always feasible. But there might be ways to slightly make it better or get slightly more active. So if you're driving to work, maybe parking your car slightly further away and walking in a little bit more, potentially. Or if you're getting the bus from door to door, actually getting the office up early and walking a little bit more. Using the park and ride service, cycling if that's an option for you. All these things would increase our physical activity, energy expenditure, reduce our sedentary behaviour, which is one of the things that sort of link us to, or most people, gaining weight, being overweight, or being obese. And making these little changes long term can have huge health outcomes. And within the UK, I know one of the things that public transport is not great. I'm not a great lover of it either, but trying to make the best of it as you can, trying to figure out a way that's going to work for you and your situation. It doesn't have to be every day. It could be one day a week. It could be one day every 2 weeks, once a month. That will have an impact long term as long as we're consistent with it, and we might find that actually we enjoy those days a little bit more potentially. So a 2013 study found that people who walked or biked to work more likely to lose weight and have lower levels of body fat than those who drove to work. Makes sense a little bit. More physical activity, more energy expenditure, and it'll probably help with health outcomes long term. We didn't get the actual outcomes with regards to health, but I presume people who are more active day to day probably are more likely to have better health outcomes long term. So a 2012 study found that people who used the park and ride service more likely to walk or bike to work. That kind of makes sense. But again, it's opening up the opportunity. So it's not necessarily that you've got to walk. Potentially you might want to get the train in with a folded bike or whatever. I've known people rollerblade to work, or even just carpool with someone else that you end up walking to meet them and they pick you up. That's another option there. But all these things are increasing the amount of physical activity. Those little opportunities where it's not necessarily, I'm not going to get a half-hour walk in the morning. You might do, but it might be a 5-minute walk. It might be a 10-minute walk, and that's more than enough over the course of the week to potentially double. Maybe even add an extra half onto the amount that you're doing, extra 50% to your physical activity levels, which has a significant impact on people's weight long term. So the 4 that we've got there: trying standing desks, walking meetings, which can be really useful, energy expenditure again, managing your environment, again, decluttering your desk, but also food cues, what's around you, can really help with reducing your reliance on willpower and potentially having discussions around having healthier options more readily available within the office. And number three was using your time outside of work to the max. So again, looking for those opportunities outside of work for extra bits of physical activity. Joining a club can be a really good option as well. I found that personally when me and my partner, we joined a running club when we lived in Barnsley, and it was one of the best things for us because twice a week we'd get up and get home from work and we'd be straight out to that run club. Great conversation with the people, covered a lot of time on our feet, got a lot fitter during that time as well, met some lovely people and really enjoyed it, and we really look forward to it. So having a group or a community to be a part of can be a big part of that as well. Last of all was around active travel, trying to make our travel to work, to and from work, more active, however possible. Any more walking, biking, using public transport, carpooling with someone else, any way that you feel that's probably going to be better than sitting in a car door to door, potentially parking further away is another option as well. So there's lots of things to try there. I'll bring this series back every now and then because there's so many different things. And like I said from the get-go, it's not about trying to incorporate everything that we discuss. Even just one of them and making progress with it can be a huge thing to managing your weight long term and getting healthier long term as well. But these are here to spark ideas potentially of something that I've not covered, and that could be the thing that you find really kickstart your weight loss journey. Fantastic. And if you could share that with me, that'd be brilliant. I'll share it with everyone else. But these are here to spark ideas, potentially spark conversations with others within the office, to make our desk jobs, which potentially can have an impact on our health, actually turn that into a positive, helping us lose weight a bit easier, making it easier to manage our health, have better health outcomes, have a better quality of life, and live healthier and happier lives long term. So there you have it. Thank you very much for listening to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. If you have any questions, queries, or would like to reach out to me, please do. I am at Louis Padian Nutrition, which is at LOUISPADIAN Nutrition on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and all other social media platforms. If you're looking for support in achieving your goals and living a healthier, happier, and more balanced life in the process, click the link below and inquire about working with me. Remember to subscribe to the Balanced Approach podcast wherever you're listening for more insightful episodes, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.